The first thing Morgan noticed was the ceiling white-tiled and humming with soft fluorescent light. Her mouth felt like sandpaper, her throat raw from disuse. A distant beeping synced with her shallow breathing. She tried to move, but pain sliced through her hips and legs, anchoring her to the bed. A voice, gentle and firm, broke the haze. "You're in recovery. You've been unconscious for 2 days." Morgan turned her head toward the sound. A nurse stood by the bedside adjusting her IV. Her badge read, Camille. There was a kindness in her eyes, the practiced warmth of someone who'd seen pain up close too many times. "Car accident," Camille said softly. "Drunk driver ran a red light. You were hit broadside, both legs fractured. They performed surgery, titanium rods. You'll heal, but it'll take time." Morgan blinked slowly, her brain foggy but trying to piece it all together. She remembered leaving the office late, rain hitting the windshield, a flash of headlights, and then nothing. 2 days gone just like that. She moved her fingers slightly, then her arms. Okay, breathing. Alive. That counted for something. "Your parents were notified," Camille added. "They stopped by. Left a few things. Said they were catching a flight." Morgan's brow furrowed. "A flight?" Camille nodded, handing her a glass of water with a straw. "Didn't say where. Just out of the country." Morgan's heart thumped harder. She reached for the hospital tray, her hand shaking as Camille helped place her phone into it. The screen lit up with a dozen missed notifications, but only one stood out, a voicemail from her mother, time-stamped 7 hours ago. She hit play. "Hey, honey. Just a quick note, we're boarding now, headed to New Zealand. It's been on our bucket list forever. Since Brielle's between jobs again, we thought why not bring her along? Anyway, don't call us while we're there, roaming charges and all that. If there's an emergency, the hospital has our email. We'll be back in 3 weeks. Love you." Morgan stared at the phone as if it might morph into something else. 3 weeks. New Zealand. With Brielle. Don't call us. The beeping on her monitor quickened, and Camille's head turned toward the sound. "You okay?" Morgan didn't answer. Her eyes stayed fixed on the ceiling, now blurring with forming tears. At 28, Morgan Hayes had always been the stable one, the reliable daughter, the glue. While others crumbled under pressure, she thrived. She graduated early with a degree in UX design, worked for a boutique tech firm in New York, and had just signed a lease on her own condo. She'd never missed a birthday call, always sent flowers on anniversaries, and paid off part of her parents' mortgage when her dad hinted at early retirement. And yet this. She was lying in a hospital bed, bones pinned together with metal, and her family had left the country without waiting for her to wake up. Not a conversation, not a question, just gone. Morgan turned her face away from Camille and closed her eyes. Her body ached, but the pain in her chest wasn't from fractures or IVs. It was quieter, deeper, familiar in a way she wished it wasn't. She had never asked for much, just to be seen, to matter, and once again it seemed even that was too much. Morgan had once believed her family was normal. Maybe not perfect, but solid. They lived in a 2-story home with ivy climbing up the white porch rails and a backyard full of creaky memories. Old tire swings, crooked garden beds, and the fading echo of childhood birthday parties. From the outside, they looked like a magazine ad for suburban stability, but like any polished surface, cracks were always there, subtle, hidden in the quiet moments. Dinner was always served at 6 p.m. sharp with a rotating menu and carefully folded napkins. There was laughter, sure, but it was often forced, directed at Brielle's stories, her impulsive ideas, her latest big plans. Morgan, meanwhile, was met with nods, distracted comments, or polite indifference. The things she accomplished, good grades, scholarships, job offers, were praised in passing, then forgotten. Brielle was the firework. Morgan was the foundation, unmoving, unnoticed. At first, Morgan didn't mind. She liked being dependable. She liked solving problems. When Brielle forgot a college application deadline, Morgan stayed up late filling it out for her. When their mom had surgery, it was Morgan who took time off work to come home and cook, clean, and organize the medication schedule. Brielle brought flowers and posed for Instagram photos, and yet in every family photo, Brielle was always in the center, always glowing. Elaine and Patrick beamed at her like she was the sun. Morgan was there too, of course, just outside the spotlight, holding the camera, cropped from the frame. Morgan stared at the hospital ceiling, the voicemail from her mother still echoing in her mind. "Since Brielle's between jobs again, we thought why not bring her along?" That one line cut deeper than the rest. Of course, Brielle had joined. She always did. To dinners, to family trips, even to Morgan's own graduation party, where she'd shown up an hour late in a red dress and ended up getting more attention than the graduate. Morgan's grip tightened on the blanket. Her arms trembled not from painkillers, but from the weight of years she had quietly carried. She remembered when she got her first job offer, a UX designer role at a firm in New York City. She had called her parents immediately, voice shaking with excitement. Her dad's first words, "That's great, honey. Does this mean you can help with the mortgage?" She'd said yes, of course. That's what Morgan did. Even now, Morgan could see the pattern so clearly it made her stomach twist. When Brielle dropped out of her marketing job to try event planning, Morgan paid for her certification course. When that didn't stick and she decided on photography, Morgan bought her a camera. When she needed a fresh look to launch her personal brand, Morgan sent her a check labeled New Beginnings. Every time her parents cheered. "Look how supportive your sister is," her mom would say. "Brielle's just trying to find her path. Not everyone has it all figured out like you do." Morgan never pushed back, never demanded equal praise or appreciation. She figured that being the responsible one meant staying quiet, staying useful. Now, as she lay in a recovery room, steel in her legs and silence in her chest, she finally wondered, what had all that quiet really bought her? Outside, the afternoon sun spilled through the window blinds in soft golden lines. Camille stepped in again, this time without saying anything. She handed Morgan a fresh cup of water and adjusted the pillows behind her back. Then, sensing the silence, she simply sat down. "You're not alone in this," she said quietly. Morgan didn't answer. Not yet. But for the first time, she wasn't entirely sure she believed it. Morgan had never thought of herself as generous. Not in the way people usually meant it. She didn't throw big parties or hand out $100 bills at Christmas. Her generosity was quiet, functional, tucked between lines of spreadsheets and split-second decisions. She was the kind of person who didn't wait to be asked, she just did what needed doing. When her parents hinted that bills were tight, she added them to her automatic payment queue. When Brielle's rent was late again, Morgan called the landlord herself and wired the funds. No drama, no lectures, just results. She didn't think of it as enabling. Not then. She thought it was love. In the months before the accident, Morgan's life had finally started to steady. Her job had recently been promoted to a senior design lead, working remotely with a lean startup based in San Francisco. It was demanding, sure, but rewarding. She'd spent weekends redecorating her small condo, choosing furniture that made her space feel warm instead of utilitarian. A plush olive couch, tall indoor plants, soft lighting. It was the first time in years she'd allowed herself to nest. And yet, even in that quiet joy, the obligations kept coming. A quick loan for Mom's dental work, a last-minute Venmo request from Brielle for new luggage. "I swear I'll pay you back once this influencer collab hits." A 3-figure Uber bill to get Dad to a golf outing when his car wouldn't start. Morgan covered it all without blinking. She kept a color-coded spreadsheet to track it family support, not reimbursed. There were over 75 entries. The thing that stung the most wasn't the money. She made enough to stay afloat. It was how none of it seemed to matter. There were no thank you notes, no texts that said, "You saved me this month," no conversations that acknowledged the weight she carried. Her support wasn't appreciated, it was assumed. She remembered once hearing her mom describe her to a neighbor, Morgan's the practical one, Brielle's the dreamer. Just that. As if being practical was some sterile skill set, not the scaffolding that held the entire family upright. Morgan's fingers itched now, wanting to open that spreadsheet again, even here in the hospital. Camille had left her laptop in the drawer next to the bed, still powered down, still untouched since the crash. She thought about the line items. April 3rd, $750. Emergency vet bill for Dad's dog. April 9th, $1,200. New camera lens for Brielle. April 14th, $2,000. Mortgage help just this once. She thought about how she'd even apologized for asking Brielle to label the transfers correctly. "I just need it to stay organized for taxes," Morgan had said. Brielle laughed. "God, you're so type A." Now, with both legs shattered and an inbox full of silence, Morgan realized something terrifying. If she stopped giving tomorrow, would anyone even notice? Or worse, would they just get angry? Camille returned briefly to check her vitals. Morgan watched her fingers move with practiced ease, her presence calm and grounding. When she left, the silence in the room felt sharper than before. Morgan exhaled slowly, letting her head rest against the pillow. She wasn't just physically broken, she was tired in a way no surgery could fix. Tired of being needed but never chosen. Tired of being the scaffolding no one saw until it cracked. The first time Morgan said no to her family, it wasn't even a real no. It was a pause. It happened 6 weeks before the crash. Her father had texted asking for help with a property tax payment that was unexpectedly high. It wasn't a small amount, over $3,000, and Morgan had just put a chunk of her savings toward furnishing her condo. She didn't reply immediately, just let the message sit for a day while she checked her budget. By the next morning, she had 5 missed calls, 3 voicemails, and a scathing email from her mother titled, "We've always been there for you." She ended up transferring the money anyway. The next week, Brielle posted a photo in a white sundress sipping something tropical with the caption, "Grateful for spontaneous escapes, the location tag Palm Springs." Morgan didn't comment. She didn't even feel angry, just hollow. This was how it always went. Her parents had built a version of Morgan in their minds that made it easy to ask for things, that Morgan was strong, independent, the one who always landed on her feet, that Morgan didn't need anything. That version wasn't real, but it was convenient. She remembered when Brielle got into a minor fender bender last summer, nothing serious, just a cracked bumper and a dented ego. Their mom had called Morgan in a panic. "Can you come help her? She's shaken up." Morgan was in back-to-back meetings that day and lived 3 hours away. "She's not hurt," Morgan said. "She has roadside assistance." There was a pause, then a sigh. "You've changed her," Mother said. "You used to be more available." Morgan paid for the repairs anyway, just like she'd paid for Brielle's Invisalign, her marketing courses, and the startup idea that died after 1 week. Every time she hesitated, she was guilted into action. The narrative was always the same. Morgan was the reliable one, the grown-up, the rock. But lately that rock had begun to crack. In the hospital, the days blurred into each other. The painkillers dulled her senses, but not enough to quiet her thoughts. Nurses came and went. Camille remained the only constant, gentle, quiet, but unafraid to make space for silence. One night, Camille sat at her bedside eating yogurt out of a paper cup. "Want company?" she asked casually. Morgan nodded. They didn't speak for a while. The soft hum of medical monitors filled the room. Then Morgan asked, almost in a whisper, "Do people ever stop noticing you're tired?" Camille looked up. Her gaze was steady. "They do if you never say it out loud." Morgan blinked. It wasn't revolutionary, but it landed like a blow. She had never said it. Not once. Not to her parents. Not to Brielle. Not even to herself. She had always thought setting boundaries meant shutting people out, that saying no meant being cold, selfish, unloving. But now, lying there with titanium threaded through her legs and a phone full of silence, she wondered if maybe the real selfishness was letting everyone treat her like she didn't need protecting. Maybe the most loving thing she could do for herself was finally stop letting them get away with it. Outside, the hallway lights dimmed to evening mode. Camille gave her a soft smile and stood up to leave. "I'll be back in the morning," she said. "Try to rest." Morgan nodded, but she wasn't sure sleep would come. Instead, she stared at the ceiling and thought about all the times she'd picked up the phone when she didn't want to. All the times she'd covered for people who never said thank you. All the times she'd been tired but didn't think she had the right to be. That version of her, the one who never needed anything, was dying, and maybe that was a good thing. The first time Morgan tried to reach out to her parents after waking up, she didn't expect much. Maybe a voicemail, a quick check-in, something. Instead, she found her mother's Instagram. Elaine Hayes had never been a particularly active social media user, but since the trip to New Zealand had started, she'd discovered a flair for filters and captions. Morgan stared at the image on her phone, a photo of her mom standing outside a winery in Queenstown, wearing oversized sunglasses and holding shopping bags like she'd stepped out of a catalog. Caption: Savoring life's little pleasures. There was another one right below it, her dad smiling behind a flight of wine. Then Brielle appeared barefoot in a plush robe on a spa balcony, mimosa in hand. Recharge mode activated. Morgan's thumb hovered over the screen. None of them had messaged her. None had asked how her surgery went, or if she was eating, or even if she could sit up in bed without crying. But they had time for hashtags. It was a surreal thing being replaced. They hadn't said it out loud, but the silence was deafening. Morgan didn't matter, not the way Brielle did. Brielle was the one they protected, the one they indulged. The baby, the brand. Morgan had just been the scaffolding, the one who paid for passports, booked appointments, checked expiration dates, made sure insurance premiums were paid on time. It was all invisible work. And now, with her body literally broken, it was clearer than ever. They only noticed her when she functioned. Now that she couldn't, they left. She stopped checking her messages after that, stopped opening email. Even the nurses noticed. "You want me to read anything to you?" Camille asked gently one morning. "No," Morgan said. "There's nothing I want to hear." It wasn't just pain anymore. It was detachment, cool, deliberate, and unfamiliar. And strangely, it felt like clarity. She thought about her last birthday. She had turned 28 and hosted a quiet dinner at her place. Homemade lasagna candles, a playlist of acoustic covers. She invited her parents and Brielle. No one came. Brielle had a photo shoot. Her mom said traffic was insane that day. Her dad forgot entirely. Camille looked at her from across the bed, reading something in Morgan's face that hadn't been spoken aloud. "You know," Camille said, "sometimes absence is its own answer." Morgan said nothing, but a quiet part of her agreed. 2 days later, she asked Camille for her laptop. "I just need to check a few things," she said. Camille nodded and wheeled the bedside table closer. Morgan opened her banking app first. It wasn't a surprise, but it still hurt. In the last month alone, nearly $10,000 had left her accounts. Mortgage support, grocery stipends, Brielle's career coaching sessions, a rental deposit. She stared at the line items like they were tombstones, each one marking a piece of her given away too easily. Then at the bottom of her credit card statement, she saw it. Southern Skies Travel come to $1,247. Posted 2 days after the accident. Her card. Their vacation. Morgan didn't cry. Not this time. She just stared at the screen, jaw tight, heart steady. There was a silence inside her that felt newly born, not numb but resolved. They had made it clear. She was not family, she was funding, and Morgan Hayes had finally reached her limit. Morgan didn't open Instagram again. She didn't need to see another filtered image of Brielle pretending her life was something it wasn't. Carefree, earned real. She didn't need to see her mother smiling outside a boutique she probably paid for, or her dad swirling red wine in a glass he couldn't afford. What hurt more than the pictures was the knowing. They weren't even pretending to care. They hadn't even paused the celebration. Morgan was starting to understand something she hadn't been ready to face for most of her life. She had never really belonged, not in the way a daughter is supposed to belong to a family. Her role had always been conditional, useful, silent. Now injured and temporarily useless, her place had vanished. On the 5th night after the accident, Camille brought in a new blanket and asked, "How's the pain?" Morgan hesitated. "The physical stuff," she asked. Camille nodded. "It's manageable." Camille gave her a long look, then placed the blanket gently at the foot of the bed, and the rest, Morgan stared at her hands, fingers flexing slightly against the bedsheets. "You know what's weird?" she finally said. "No one's ghosted me, not officially, but they're gone. And somehow that feels worse." Camille nodded like she understood. Maybe she did. That night, Morgan lay awake, the hospital room dim and hushed around her. Machines beeped rhythmically, the air sterile and still. She thought about all the things she'd done over the years to earn a place at her family's table. Thought about every time she showed up, paid up, stayed quiet. She had built her entire identity on the illusion that if she just loved enough, if she gave enough, they would eventually see her. The truth was more brutal. They saw her just fine. They just didn't care. She remembered something her therapist once said, something she hadn't wanted to believe at the time: "You're grieving someone who's still alive." That's what this was. A grief without a funeral, a heartbreak without a clean break. Morgan hadn't just lost her family on the operating table, she'd lost them long before. She'd just been too loyal to notice. The next morning, Camille helped her into a sitting position for the first time. It was excruciating, every muscle stiff and foreign, but Morgan welcomed the pain. It was real. It was proof she was still here, still fighting, even if she wasn't sure what for yet. She stared out the window as light flooded the room. Spring was just starting to show itself, tiny buds on trees, the faint scent of pollen in the air. Morgan inhaled slowly. She didn't feel hopeful, not yet, but she did feel something new, final. There would be no going back after this. She picked up her phone and stared at the last message from her mom sent the morning they left for Queenstown. "Love you." Morgan didn't delete it, but she didn't reply either. Instead, she scrolled to the settings menu and turned off notifications from every group chat involving her family, one by one. A simple act, but it felt like closing a door that had been left open for too long. In that quiet moment, Morgan didn't feel vengeful, or bitter, or even sad. She felt still, and in that stillness something shifted. She wasn't waiting for an apology anymore. She wasn't waiting to be chosen. She was done waiting. Morgan hadn't expected to feel joy again so soon, but it crept in tentative quiet on the morning she received the email. It was from her company's founder's subject line, "Official Series A Success." She opened the message, heart already pounding. Her startup had secured $8.5 million in funding. After months of sleepless nights designing product interfaces, running user tests, and rewriting specs until her eyes burned, it had finally happened. Attached was a press release. Her name was in the second paragraph: Morgan Hayes, Senior UX Lead, whose work shaped the platform's usability and onboarding success. Morgan blinked, then blinked again. For a full 5 seconds, she forgot about the rods in her legs and the muted ache behind her eyes. All she could feel was pride. She'd built something that mattered, and this time the world would know it. Camille noticed the shift when she entered the room. "You're glowing," she said, raising an eyebrow. "I got promoted," Morgan said softly. "Well, sort of. It's more symbolic, but I was mentioned in our Series A press release." Camille smiled. "That's amazing. Congrats." Morgan handed her the tablet with the article pulled up, needing someone to witness it. Camille read the paragraph slowly, then looked up. "That's a big deal, Morgan." Morgan nodded, but she wasn't just proud, she was hopeful. This might finally be enough. That afternoon, she called her parents. She hesitated only briefly, thumb hovering over her mom's contact name. Maybe things had been strained, but this was different. This was proof. Success documented and public. Maybe, just maybe, they'd finally say what she'd been waiting to hear for years. "We're proud of you. We see you. We were wrong." The phone rang twice before going to voicemail. She tried her dad. Straight to voicemail. Then Brielle. Same thing. She tried not to take it personally. Time zones. Spotty international service. That was all. But an hour later, she checked Instagram again. Brielle had just posted a photo laughing barefoot in a vineyard holding up a bottle of wine with the caption, "Crushed grapes, not goals." In the background, Morgan spotted both her parents. No one looked like they were struggling with signal. She waited until the next morning before trying again. This time, her mom answered. "Morgan, hey, everything okay?" Her voice was too bright, forced, like someone trying to smile through an awkward customer service call. Morgan swallowed her frustration. "Yeah, just wanted to let you know we secured funding. The company, they put my name in the press release. It's kind of a big deal." A pause. Not long, but long enough to sting. "Well, that's great. We're actually about to board a ferry, so I can't talk long. But congratulations, sweetie." In the background, Morgan heard laughter, Brielle's unmistakable cackle, then her father's voice. Tell her we'll look it up later, her mom continued. Anyway, we're super proud of you. Gotta run, love you. Click. No questions, no follow-up, no send us the article or we'll call you when we're back. Just a throwaway line of hollow praise shoved between sightseeing and wine tastings. Morgan stared at the home screen of her phone, her stomach tight. The flicker of hope she'd allowed herself just hours ago now felt ridiculous. She closed her eyes and whispered to no one. Of course. She didn't cry this time, didn't rage or scream. She just lay there still as the realization finished settling. It didn't matter what she accomplished. It didn't matter how many bills she paid. It didn't matter how many dreams she funded. She would always be the utility, the bank account, the emotional doormat. And even when she did something undeniably worthy, they still left her behind. The voicemail arrived the next morning. Morgan had been dozing when her phone buzzed against the tray table. She ignored it at first, assuming it was another bank notification or newsletter. But Camille, ever attentive, picked it up and glanced at the screen. You got a voicemail, she said gently, placing the phone in Morgan's hand. Morgan squinted at the screen. The timestamp read 7:42 a.m. The contact mom. Her thumb hovered for a moment before she tapped play. Her mother's voice came through bright and cheerful, like she was calling from a brunch reservation instead of halfway around the world. Hey, honey, just wanted to let you know we're at the airport about to board our flight to New Zealand. Morgan blinked. We've been talking about this trip for years, and with Brielle between jobs again, we figured why not make it a family adventure? Timing's perfect. Morgan's mouth went dry. A muffled voice, her father's, cut in from the background. Tell her not to call. Roaming charges are murder. Her mom laughed lightly. Right. So don't call us while we're in Queenstown. Okay, if there's an emergency, the hospital has our email. We'll be back in 3 weeks. Love you, click. Silence. Morgan's grip tightened around the phone until her knuckles turned white. She stared at the screen like it had just punched her. 3 weeks. They were leaving the country on vacation while she lay in a hospital bed with both legs broken. They had come to the hospital while she was unconscious, dropped off a few belongings, and then boarded a plane without even waiting for her to wake up. Without saying goodbye, without asking if she'd be okay, without leaving a way to reach them. Morgan's heartbeat echoed in her ears. The beeping from the heart monitor beside her quickened. Camille stepped closer. You all right? Morgan nodded stiffly, but the tears were already pooling. She turned her face away, letting them fall quietly into her pillow. No sobs. No shaking, just the kind of grief that sits low and wide, too heavy to cry out, too familiar to be surprising. She wasn't just sad, she was humiliated. They knew she was hurt. They knew she had gone through major surgery. They knew she'd be alone. And they went anyway. Not just with permission, but with excitement. Like she was an afterthought. A checkbox already ticked. She remembered being 10 years old and breaking her wrist during a soccer game. Her dad had carried her to the car, one arm steady beneath her knees, whispering, I've got you, kiddo. She remembered her mom fussing at the emergency room, hovering close, smoothing her hair. That memory had stayed with her, proof that they had once loved her, really loved her. She had used it to defend them for years. But now that memory felt fake, like a movie scene she'd misremembered as real. After a long silence, Camille finally spoke. You don't have to keep trying. Morgan glanced at her. Trying what? To earn them. Morgan looked down at her hands. She didn't respond, because she wasn't sure if she could stop. Later that evening, after Camille had left and the sky outside turned lavender with dusk, Morgan played the voicemail again. Not because she missed them, not even because she was angry. She just needed to make sure she hadn't imagined it. That they had actually said it, don't call us while we're in Queenstown, like it was the most casual thing in the world. And they'd brought Brielle. Of course they had. She pictured her sister sipping champagne in business class, curled under a cashmere blanket Morgan probably paid for. Morgan's stomach twisted. They weren't even hiding it anymore. She opened her email and searched her inbox. There it was, a booking confirmation from a travel agency forwarded to her address because her credit card had been used for the purchase. The subject line, Your New Zealand adventure awaits. The total, $3,781. 2 adult tickets, 1 business class upgrade, hotel suite, wine tours. Morgan stared at the screen for a long time. Her hands didn't shake. Her vision didn't blur. Something colder took hold, something final. Morgan had always tracked her spending, not because she was obsessive, but because it was the only way to stay ahead of the chaos. When your family treated you like a living trust fund, there wasn't room for sloppiness. She had tabs, categories, folders, a master spreadsheet, and still this was the first time she truly saw it. She sat up slowly in the hospital bed, Camille helping her adjust the pillows behind her back. Her laptop rested on the tray table in front of her, the screen casting a pale glow across her face. She scrolled through rows of transactions, her fingers clicking deliberately, methodically. Every line item told a story. March 3rd, $2,000. Mortgage supplement. March 7th, $480. Professional wardrobe for Brielle. March 10th, $312. Groceries for parents. March 12th, $800. SUV car payment. March 13th, $1, $2.47. Travel agency charge. March 15th, $152. Streaming subscriptions. March 16th, $69. Wine club gift membership for Brielle. In just under 2 weeks, she had funded nearly $5,000 worth of family expenses, quietly, automatically, and that was just March. Morgan opened her credit card dashboard. She zoomed in on the Southern Skies travel company charge, expanded the details, and saw her own billing address attached to the booking. They hadn't even used Brielle's name or her parents' card. They'd used hers. It was more than disrespect. It was theft, exploitation, fraud. And yet what made Morgan feel sick wasn't the money. It was the ease. How casually they'd done it, how confident they were that she'd just keep paying, that she'd never say no, because she never had. She leaned back against the pillow, eyes closed. How many times had she covered for them? How many months had she quietly transferred just a little extra to help with car repairs, medical copays, rent shortfalls? And how many times had she received a thank you in return? She couldn't remember a single one. What she could remember was being called uptight when she asked them to stop charging wine to her card, or dramatic when she suggested Brielle get a part-time job between passion projects. Morgan had let it happen. She'd told herself it was love, family, duty, but now with steel rods in her legs and an IV drip in her arm, she saw it for what it really was. She wasn't a daughter. She was an ATM with a pulse. Camille returned just as Morgan minimized the window. She didn't say anything at first, just observed the expression on Morgan's face. "You look like you're about to make a decision," she said gently. Morgan nodded. "I think I am." Camille raised an eyebrow. "I'm done," Morgan said. "Done. How I'm changing my passwords, canceling the cards, pulling my savings. Every auto transfer stops tonight." Camille didn't smile. She didn't celebrate. She just nodded like someone witnessing a quiet, sacred vow. That night, after Camille dimmed the lights and left the room, Morgan got to work. She logged into her bank's fraud center, reported the unauthorized travel charge, locked the card, ordered a new one, then moved what was left of her savings into a brand new account at a bank her parents didn't know existed. It wasn't much, barely enough to cover a few months' expenses if she couldn't work, but it was hers, and that mattered more than she expected. She opened the family expenses spreadsheet next. She didn't delete it. She just renamed the file last time. Afterward, she lay back in bed and stared at the ceiling. For the first time since waking up in the hospital, her body didn't feel like a cage. It still hurt, yes. Her legs throbbed, her back ached, but something inside had finally gone, still settled like dust after a long, bitter storm. They had told her not to call, so she wouldn't. And that silence, it felt like the beginning of something, not revenge, not even justice, something quieter, stronger, freedom. The hospital's social worker, Mr. Reyes, had the calmest voice Morgan had ever heard. It was the kind of voice that made people feel safe, even when everything else was falling apart. He sat across from her in a plain chair, notepad in hand, listening without interrupting as she walked him through the full story. How she'd supported her parents for years, how she'd paid for her sisters' ever-changing careers, how they'd used her credit card to fly to New Zealand 2 days after she'd nearly died in a car crash. Reyes didn't flinch. He just nodded slowly, as if each detail confirmed something he already suspected. When Morgan finally stopped talking, he folded his hands together and said, "You're not crazy, and you're not alone." Her throat tightened at those words. She hadn't realized how much she needed to hear them. With his help, she contacted the bank's fraud department. She explained the unauthorized travel charges. Camille sat beside her the entire time, silent but steady, as Morgan canceled the card and revoked access to every account her family had ever touched. Checking, savings, investment apps, shared utilities, Brielle's recurring career funding deposits. One by one, they vanished. Morgan didn't shake. She didn't cry. She didn't even hesitate. It was like shutting off faucets that had been leaking for years. By the end of the hour, she felt lighter. Reyes helped her file a formal statement outlining the financial abuse. "This doesn't mean you're filing criminal charges," he clarified. "It just creates a paper trail, in case things escalate later." Morgan nodded. That was fine. She didn't want revenge. She wanted protection. And peace. For the first time in her adult life, she was setting a limit and watching it hold. Back in her hospital room, Camille wheeled in lunch and gave her an approving glance. "So, how does it feel Morgan didn't answer right away?" She looked down at the plate of food, chicken breast mashed potatoes, steamed carrots, and felt a strange wave of gratitude for its blandness, for its normalcy. "I thought I'd feel guilt," she said finally. "But I don't." Camille sat on the edge of the bed. "Because there's nothing to feel guilty about," she said. "You weren't setting boundaries. You were setting yourself on fire to keep them warm." Morgan stared at her for a long time, then nodded once. That metaphor stuck, because it was true. That evening, she checked her email again. The refund from the canceled return flights had landed, a partial amount just enough to sting, but it wasn't the money that mattered. It was the confirmation. She had canceled the booking. 2 adults, 1 upgraded seat for Brielle, gone. The hotel deposit had been non-refundable. That part made her smile. She forwarded the travel confirmation and her fraud report to Reyes just in case. Then she drafted a new file on her desktop and titled it Boundaries, Enforced. Inside, she made a list of everything she had just done, changed all passwords, revoked shared access, canceled all autopays, opened new accounts, froze credit for safety, contacted legal aid, canceled travel booking. Each bullet point felt like a small victory, a reclaiming of power. That night, she slept deeper than she had since the crash. No dreams, no racing thoughts, no what-if scenarios, just rest, the kind that only comes when the alarms stop ringing, when your body and mind finally believe they're safe. By morning, she was ready for what came next. Not revenge, not confrontation, but something quieter, stronger. She was no longer asking for her family's love. She was building a life where she didn't need it to survive. The emails started at 2:07 a.m., Portland time. Morgan had been drifting in and out of sleep when her phone buzzed once, then twice, then again in quick succession. Camille had reminded her to silence notifications, but she hadn't. A part of her, one she didn't want to admit, had been waiting. The subject line from her dad read, "What the hell is going on?" She opened it. "We're stranded in Queenstown. Our cards are being declined. The bank says the accounts are locked. This is cruel, Morgan. We're your parents." 2 minutes later came her mother's follow-up. "I don't know what this phase is, but it needs to stop. You need to call the bank and undo whatever you did. This is not normal. We raised you better than this." Then Brielle chimed in. "Seriously over a car crash? You're being dramatic. You'll be fine. Nurses are paid for that. We're stuck here and it's your fault." Morgan stared at the screen. Not one message asked if she was okay. Not one acknowledged her surgery, her pain, or even her survival. They were upset not because they were scared for her, but because their comfort had been interrupted. Each message was a different flavor of entitlement. Shock disguised as concern. Guilt dressed up like care. She didn't reply. Instead, she forwarded the emails to Reyes. No commentary, just documentation. She didn't need to defend herself anymore. The paper trail would do it for her. She stared longest at Brielle's message, "You'll be fine. Nurses are paid for that." As if her recovery, her body broken, stitched back together, was just another budget line, an inconvenience. Morgan pressed reply and typed just 3 words, "Boundaries are free." She hit send and felt calm wash over her like a still tide. More emails followed. Her dad accused her of being mentally unstable. Her mom wrote that she was lashing out and clearly not well. Brielle doubled down with sarcasm. Guess Queenstown wasn't scenic enough to make you chill out. Morgan stopped reading. By sunrise, she had blocked their numbers. She left her email open not to communicate but to archive, to track. If they escalated this, she'd be ready. She no longer needed their approval. She no longer feared their backlash. That old version of her, the fixer, the buffer, the bridge, was gone. Camille brought breakfast around 8 a.m. She didn't comment on the dark circles under Morgan's eyes or the unread messages piling up. She simply poured the coffee and placed it gently beside the tray. "Did they write?" she asked quietly. Morgan nodded. "A lot." Camille didn't ask what they said. She just peeled an orange and split the slices onto a napkin between them. They ate in silence. No rush, no small talk, just shared breath and stillness. It was the most comfort Morgan had felt in days. That afternoon, the sun cast a soft amber light across the room. Morgan picked up her phone again, stared at the screen, and scrolled to Brielle's final message. "Can we talk? Just us, no apology. No ownership. Just another door she expected Morgan to walk through." Morgan let the screen dim. "Some bridges don't burn, they just quietly fall behind you." She opened her music app and played a slow, wordless piano track, the kind you only listen to when you were letting go, and with each note something inside her loosened. Morgan wasn't healed yet, her legs still hurt. She still had months of physical therapy ahead, but for the first time she no longer felt stuck. She wasn't their safety net anymore. She wasn't their plan B. She wasn't their anything except what she chose to be. And in that silence, she found a truth louder than anything they'd ever said. She was enough without them. The charge nurse called just past noon. Her voice was clipped, trying to stay professional. "Your parents and sister are downstairs. They're upset." Morgan didn't respond right away. It had been nearly 2 weeks since she'd canceled the return flight. 11 days since the messages started pouring in, each more condescending than the last. She'd blocked the numbers, filtered the emails, shut every door they had ever used to walk into her life without knocking. And yet, here they were. Morgan looked at Camille, who had just finished adjusting her IV. "Will you stay with me?" she asked. Camille didn't hesitate. "Absolutely." She wheeled in an extra chair and stood beside Morgan as the door opened. They entered fast. No knock, no hesitation. Like they still thought they had the right. Her mother, first heels clicking against the floor, eyes tight with judgment. Her father, close behind arms, crossed lips already moving with accusation. Brielle lingered in the back, sunglasses still pushed up in her hair, like she was too cool to be here. "What is wrong with you?" Her mother started already halfway to the bed. "Do you have any idea what you've put us through?" Her father barked. "Stranded in a foreign country. Humiliated. We had to borrow money to fly back." "You embarrass this family," her mother added. Morgan didn't flinch. She didn't shout back or cry or try to explain. She just reached to the tray beside her and picked up the manila folder she'd prepared the night before. "These are the terms," she said, calmly handing it to her father. He scoffed. "Terms? What are we, your employees now?" "I'm not doing this emotionally anymore," Morgan said, voice steady. "This is a one-time transition payment. No more monthly support. No shared accounts. If you want a relationship with me, it will be through a licensed family mediator. Otherwise, we go our separate ways." Silence filled the room like pressure before a storm. Brielle stepped forward. "So, what, you're cutting us off? Going to pretend you're an orphan now?" Morgan met her eyes. "No pretending necessary. You made that choice the second you posted vacation selfies while I was in surgery." Her mother grabbed the folder, flipping through it, not reading, just shaking her head. "This isn't you, Morgan," she said. "This is some breakdown. You're confused." "This is me," Morgan replied. "Just not the version you get to control anymore." Camille stood quietly beside her, hands folded, gaze unwavering. The kind of presence that made people think twice before escalating. When her father opened his mouth again, Camille spoke for the first time. "If anyone raises their voice again, I'll have hospital security escort you out." That shut them up, at least for a moment. Eventually, they left folder in hand, unopened. No apology, no regret, no understanding. They walked out the same way they walked in, entitled, outraged, unchanged. Morgan watched the door click shut behind them and waited for the feeling of guilt to arrive. It never did. Camille reached out and gently placed a hand on her arm. "You did it." For the first time since the crash, Morgan let herself believe that might be true. A week after the confrontation, Morgan was discharged from the hospital. Camille had taken care of the details, transport coordination, medication pickup, even calling ahead to Morgan's temporary home. She'd offered to help Morgan find an apartment or rehab facility, but Morgan had already made another plan. Her Aunt Noreen had called her after the crash, one of the only family members who did. The conversation had been brief, but full of warmth. "Come stay with me," she said, "just until you get your feet under you again. No strings." Morgan hesitated at first. Noreen was her mother's older sister, and they hadn't been close since Morgan was a teenager. But the offer came without pity, without questions, just quiet support. And after weeks of noise, Morgan needed quiet. Noreen picked her up on a gray Friday afternoon. The rain was light misting against the windshield as they pulled away from the hospital. Camille stood at the entrance watching with a gentle smile and a hand raised in goodbye. Morgan waved back from the passenger seat, her legs carefully braced, and elevated her mind, still buzzing from all that had changed. Noreen didn't push for conversation. She drove with a calm focus, soft jazz playing on low through the speakers. Morgan leaned back and let the silence carry her. Noreen's house was a modest one-story with wide doorways and a ramp already installed by the porch. It smelled faintly of lemon balm and something just baked. The guest room had a walk-in shower, fresh towels folded in a basket, and a bedside table stocked with tissues, a water pitcher, and a stack of paperbacks. Morgan stared at the space, stunned. "You did all this? For me?" Noreen smiled. "For you. And for me. I like being prepared." Morgan nodded slowly, the lump in her throat rising before she could stop it. Over dinner, roasted vegetables, baked salmon, and warm bread, they talked in fragments. Nothing deep, just soft surface-level conversation that didn't poke or prod. But it was after tea was poured with steam curling between them that Noreen spoke gently. "They did the same thing to your grandfather, you know." Morgan looked up. "What, your mom and her siblings? They drained his pension while he was in hospice, used the money to book back-to-back cruises, said he would have wanted them to enjoy the time they had left." Morgan blinked. "You're serious?" Noreen nodded. "I tried to stop it, but by the time I found out, most of the money was gone." Morgan set down her mug. "I always thought it was just me," she said, "that I was the failure, or the sucker." "No, sweetheart, you were just the next one in line." That night, Morgan couldn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling, the soft scent of lemon balm grounding her in the present, but her mind spinning backward. Every incident with her parents, every moment where she thought she was just being a good daughter, a dependable sister, it all rewrote itself. She hadn't been selfish for wanting boundaries. She'd been trying to survive a legacy. She thought back to the voicemail again, the laughter, the casual cruelty, the way they left. And now she understood something else. It wasn't personal. It was patterned. And that made it hurt in a different way, sharper, yes, but also clearer. Because if it wasn't about who she was, then she could stop trying to fix it. The healing had begun not just in her bones, but in her story. She wasn't trapped anymore. She was stepping off a conveyor belt her family had been riding for generations. And this time she wasn't looking back. Physical therapy started the following Monday. It was brutal. Every motion felt like dragging her limbs through concrete. Her body, still stiff and stitched from trauma, fought her at every turn. The walker felt like a betrayal, too loud, too clunky, a reminder that everything had changed. But Morgan showed up. Every time. 3 steps became 5. 5 became 10. The swelling in her knees slowly decreased. She learned how to transfer from the bed to a chair without assistance. Each win was small but real. The harder part wasn't the pain. It was the silence. Without her family's constant needs echoing in her inbox or draining her bank account, the quiet was unfamiliar. Sometimes peaceful. Sometimes terrifying. She had spent so many years responding to other people that she barely knew how to respond to herself. So she made a list. Not a budget, Not a repayment plan, just a list titled Things I Want to Try. It included cooking a new recipe, painting her nails for no reason, calling Carly from college, sending a thank you card to Camille, watching a bad rom-com with no guilt. The list wasn't impressive, but it was hers, and for the first time that felt like enough. She started reaching out to people she hadn't spoken to in years, not to ask for help or offer it, but just to reconnect. Carly texted back within minutes. "Oh my God, Morgan, I've missed you. They planned a lunch 2 weeks out. Just coffee and ketchup." Another message went to her old mentor, Diane, who used to supervise her during her early years in tech. Diane replied with a heartfelt note, "I always believed in you. I'm so glad you're taking care of yourself." It wasn't a big reunion, not a flood of open arms, but it was a start. Camille came to visit a week after Morgan moved in with Aunt Noreen. She brought muffins, blueberries, still warm, and sat with Morgan on the porch while the rain eased into a drizzle. "I know this is technically against policy," Camille said, brushing a crumb off her lap, "but I'd like to take you out for coffee sometime, not as your nurse." Morgan looked at her. Really looked. Camille wasn't just kind, she was safe. She didn't flinch at Morgan's scars or recoil from the mess of recovery. She listened without trying to fix. She stayed when things got quiet. Morgan felt something in her chest shift. Not fireworks, not butterflies, just warmth, the steady kind. "I'd like that," Morgan said softly. They went to a tiny cafe tucked between a bookstore and a dry cleaner. Camille ordered chai. Morgan got black coffee with cream. They didn't talk about the accident, or the confrontation, or even the hospital. They talked about favorite books, about the quiet beauty of early mornings, about the way music can make you cry when you least expect it. It felt easy, natural. Morgan didn't feel broken. She felt possible. Back home, she updated her list. Things I want to try now had a new entry. Say yes when it feels safe. She stared at the line and smiled. The woman she used to be would have needed permission to add that. But now she only needed space, and she was finally giving herself some. A month passed. The soreness in Morgan's legs had faded to a dull ache. She could walk short distances without the walker now, just a cane and slow, careful steps. Each morning she stretched with less stiffness. Each night she slept without needing pain medication. But it wasn't just her body healing. It was her world. Noreen's home became more than a stopgap. It became a haven. Morgan learned the rhythms of its quiet, the whistle of the kettle before 7 a.m., the sound of Noreen's slippers brushing the hardwood, the faint crackle of jazz radio in the background. There was no drama here, no guilt-tripping, no passive-aggressive sighs from the next room, just space. One evening after dinner and dishes, Morgan slipped into the guest room to rest. Her phone was on the nightstand. A single notification blinked at her. A new message from Brielle. She hesitated. They hadn't spoken since the confrontation at the hospital. Morgan had blocked her number weeks ago, but Brielle had found another way email likely, or maybe a burner number. The message preview read, "Can we talk? Just us. No parents." Morgan didn't open it, not right away. She just stared at the glowing screen, heartbeat steady. It wasn't rage she felt. It wasn't sadness either. It was clarity. She already knew what the message would say. Brielle would pretend it was a peace offering. She'd avoid apologizing outright, but toss in just enough vulnerability to keep the door cracked open. There'd be phrases like, "I didn't know it was that bad. We're still sisters, right? I miss how things used to be. I never meant to hurt you." None of it would come with real ownership. None of it would address how she'd laughed while Morgan lay unconscious, how she'd posted photos sipping champagne with captions like "sister sponsorship." Brielle wasn't trying to reconnect. She was testing for weakness. Morgan let the screen dim. Then she powered off the phone entirely. She didn't need to explain herself again. She didn't need to argue or convince or prove. That version of her, the one who begged to be seen, who bent over backward for scraps of affection, was gone. Out in the living room, Noreen was folding laundry with the TV on low. A baking show. Something light, harmless, easy. Morgan sat beside her and helped pair socks. Neither of them said anything. They didn't need to. Later that night, Camille texted, "How's your day been?" Morgan smiled. She sent a photo of the sock pile with the caption, "Domestic Goddess in Training." "You," Camille replied with a selfie wearing an apron covered in flour, "trying to make muffins from scratch. So far, it's mostly chaos." Morgan laughed for real, not just a breath through her nose, an actual laugh. That moment was simple, but it was everything, because it reminded her she wasn't frozen in the past anymore. She wasn't waiting for an apology that would never come. She wasn't explaining her worth to people who only saw her value in dollars. She wasn't fighting for space in a family that never protected hers. She had new people now, people who showed up without demanding anything, people who peeled oranges and sat through silence, people who let love feel like rest, not effort. Brielle's message would remain unopened, not out of cruelty, but because it no longer needed space in her life. Some stories don't need a final chapter, some wounds don't need acknowledgement to heal, and some doors are better left closed. By late spring, the cane was mostly gone. Morgan could walk to the end of Noreen's street and back without assistance. She still carried the cane sometimes, not because she needed it, but because it reminded her of how far she'd come. Physical therapy was now 3 days a week. The pain was no longer sharp. It was a soreness she'd earned. Like the soreness after a long hike, a reminder that she was building strength where there had once been nothing but damage. Her body was healing, but more importantly, her life was healing. The new bank account sat untouched for weeks, except for one recurring transfer, a small auto deposit, to a savings account titled Only Mine. The name made her smile every time. It wasn't much, just a few $100s a month from her freelance consulting work. After the crash, she'd asked to transition into remote assignments only. Her firm had agreed, grateful to keep her on in any capacity. They knew her value. She was no longer overextending, no longer sending silent lifelines to people who never looked back. Now every hour she worked benefited her and no one else. At night, she worked on a side project, a budgeting app designed specifically for women recovering from financial abuse. It started as a spreadsheet just to track her own expenses. But the more she built, the more she saw how many others could use it. She researched trauma-informed design. She added journal prompts next to monthly totals. She created little encouraging messages that popped up when users hit savings milestones. You are not selfish for setting boundaries. Financial freedom is emotional freedom. You are allowed to start over again and again. Morgan didn't plan to pitch it to investors or launch some big startup, but it was hers, it was good, and it was real. One afternoon, Camille stopped by with Thai takeout and a bottle of sparkling apple cider. Morgan had already set the table for two. "I have something to show you," she said, sliding her laptop across the table. Camille leaned over and squinted at the screen. "Is this your app?" Morgan nodded. "Still rough, but it's starting to come together." Camille scrolled through the mock-up, her expression slowly shifting from curiosity to admiration. "This is brilliant," she said. "Like, actually brilliant. You know how many women I've seen come through the ER completely drained by their families, and not one of them thinks it counts as abuse." Morgan swallowed. "Yeah. I didn't either. Not until it almost killed me." Camille reached across the table, gently squeezing her hand. "It didn't kill you. You survived. And now you're helping others survive too." That night, they sat on the porch and watched the sun melt behind the trees. The air smelled faintly of jasmine, and somewhere down the street, someone was playing a guitar out of tune. Morgan leaned back in her chair, her cane resting beside her like a forgotten artifact. "I used to think surviving was the same as winning," she said quietly. Camille looked over. "And now I think surviving is just surviving. It's what you do when everything falls apart. But building something after that, that's where the real win is." Camille nodded, her eyes soft. "I like this version of you," she said. "Not because you're stronger, but because you stopped pretending you didn't need care." Morgan blinked at that, then smiled. Later that week, Morgan received a letter in the mail, real paper in a real envelope, addressed in her father's handwriting. She didn't open it. She didn't throw it away either. She just slid it into the back of her desk drawer, not out of fear, but because she no longer needed to know what it said. Her story wasn't in their words anymore. It was in the dinner she was cooking for herself that night, in the app she was designing with soft colors and softer language, in the cane she could now leave behind without anxiety, in the woman she saw in the mirror scarred, yes, but solid. Morgan wasn't someone who had been left behind. She was someone who had walked away. And that difference made all the difference. A year after the crash, Morgan's apartment smelled like roasted garlic and rosemary. She had moved out of Noreen's place a few months ago, once she felt steady enough to live on her own again. Her new space was small, but full of light, soft tan walls, potted herbs on the windowsill, a reading nook in the corner she'd carved out just for herself. The dining table, modest second-hand, refinished by Morgan herself, was set for 5. Not a huge gathering, just enough for the people who'd stayed. Camille arrived first, carrying a lemon tart in a box tied with twine. She wore a soft linen dress and no makeup, her hair pulled into a loose braid. When she stepped inside, she kissed Morgan on the cheek and said, "You smell like someone who knows what she's doing." Morgan laughed. "I'm trying." The rosemary might have fought back a little. Next came Noreen with a bottle of sparkling cider under one arm and a reusable bag of fresh fruit in the other. "I know you said not to bring anything," she said as Morgan ushered her in, "but I'm physically incapable of showing up empty-handed." Carly and Marcus followed, arriving 10 minutes later with armfuls of mismatched joy, a bouquet of tulips, a container of lentil salad, and a story about Marcus accidentally locking himself out of the car in front of a taco truck. The apartment buzzed with laughter and the scent of warm bread. Nothing extravagant, no streamers or themed decor, just food. Just warmth, just chosen people. They ate slowly, talking over one another, passing plates and refilling glasses. Morgan found herself watching their faces more than she ate. She watched Noreen's hands as she sliced apples for the tart. She listened to Camille's gentle voice as she recounted a chaotic ER shift. She noted how Carly leaned into Marcus when she laughed like laughter could knock her over if she wasn't anchored. There was a time when Morgan thought family was about biology, bloodlines, obligation, inherited roles. Now she knew better. Family was about reciprocity, about who showed up when it was hard, about who stayed when you set boundaries, about who didn't make you earn affection. After dinner, while Camille rinsed dishes and Noreen folded napkins into neat quarters, Morgan slipped into her bedroom for a breath of quiet. She sat on the edge of the bed, hands resting on her lap. Her cane leaned in the corner, mostly untouched. She hadn't needed it in weeks. The desk beside her held her app mock-up, still in progress, but gaining momentum. A local women's shelter had reached out after a mutual friend shared it. They wanted to pilot it in their support programs. Morgan had said yes, quietly, but firmly. There was no press release, no applause, just progress. Her phone buzzed, a new text from an unknown number. "Can we talk?" Brielle Morgan stared at it for a moment. Same message as before, no apology, no acknowledgement, just the vague implication that Morgan owed her attention. She didn't reply. She didn't even feel tempted. Instead, she archived the message, then opened her camera app. She snapped a photo of her dining table, the empty plates, the half-eaten tart, the tulips tilting toward the last bit of evening sun. She sent it to Camille with a caption, "Feels like home." Camille replied, "Because it is." Back in the living room, Morgan settled onto the couch as Camille sat beside her, pressing their shoulders together gently. Noreen poured the last of the cider. Carly and Marcus were trading recommendations for obscure sci-fi movies. Someone had queued up a playlist that felt like summer and safety and soft goodbyes. Morgan leaned back, letting the hum of conversation wrap around her. She didn't feel like someone who had been exiled or discarded. She didn't feel like a backup plan or a bank account. She felt like a woman who had chosen again and again to rebuild, not just herself, but her life, with intention, with love, with people who loved her back. The apartment had gone quiet. After everyone left, Morgan rinsed the final few glasses and stacked the dishes neatly in the sink. She didn't feel drained, just full, like the night had given her something nourishing. The windows were cracked open. A gentle breeze stirred the corners of the curtains. Outside, the city was winding down soft headlights, distant voices, a dog barking once, then silence. Morgan changed into her pajamas, a soft cotton set she'd bought for herself as a small luxury months ago. She sat at the edge of the bed, rubbing a light balm into the scars along her left thigh. The lines had faded. They weren't gone, but they were no longer angry, no longer swollen with memory. She didn't hate them anymore. They were proof that she'd survived, and now that she'd chosen what came next. Her phone buzzed once on the nightstand. She glanced at it, half expecting a check-in from Camille, but it wasn't Camille. It was another number she didn't recognize, but she knew who it was before opening the message. Brielle, again. The message read, "Hey, just wanted to talk. Just us, no drama. I feel like we need to clear the air." Morgan stared at the screen. Same pattern, different day. There was no apology, no responsibility, just that vague implication that Morgan was being unreasonable by not responding, that it was her job to reopen the door, smooth things over, let the past be something distant and excusable. But Morgan wasn't angry. Not anymore. She wasn't even sad. She felt calm, like this was just another ripple in the water and she was already standing on shore. She didn't respond. She didn't draft a clever reply, or think of all the things she could say about the betrayal, about the years of financial manipulation, about being treated like an afterthought in her own family. Instead, she tapped and held the message. Archive. Then she opened her notes app and typed something new. I don't owe anyone access to me just because we share a last name. She saved it, not because she needed the reminder, but because someone else might someday. She stood, stretched, and padded softly into the living room. The tulips from dinner were still upright, leaning slightly in their vase. She turned off the lights, leaving only the glow of the kitchen window. She passed the drawer that held her father's unopened letter. Still there, still untouched, but not heavy. Not anymore. Later, she curled into bed and opened a novel she hadn't touched in weeks. Something fiction, something slow. She read 2 pages before her eyelids grew heavy. She set the book down and turned off the light. The quiet of the room didn't feel empty. It felt earned. That night, she dreamed not of hospitals or voicemail messages or vacation photos without her. She dreamed of a long trail through a forest, sunlight slanting through the branches. She was walking, no cane, no brace, just her own 2 legs, and behind her a series of locked doors, each one gently closing. No slams, no anger. Just quiet. In the morning, there were no new messages, no guilt, no shame, just sunlight through her curtains and the smell of coffee brewing on a timer she'd finally learned to program. She made toast, fed the cat she'd adopted 2 weeks ago, and sat down to work on the budgeting app. Another message popped up, this time from the women's shelter. They'd begun testing the beta version. Early feedback was overwhelmingly positive. Morgan replied, "That means more than you know. Thank you." As she hit send, she thought again about Brielle's text. Not with anger, not with fear, but with clarity. Some bridges don't burn. They just fall behind you. And sometimes the best closure is the silence you give back. It had been nearly 16 months since the crash. Morgan didn't mark the exact day on a calendar. She didn't need to. Her body knew. Her mind knew. But unlike before, there was no weight to the memory, just a soft recognition, like noticing the change of seasons. She was no longer rebuilding. She was living. The new apartment was still small, but she'd made it hers. The walls bore prints from local artists. The windows were lined with potted plants, lavender, basil, spider ivy. The bookshelf in the corner held stories she finally had time to read. There was no longer a cane leaning by the door. Her body moved with ease now. She ran errands without thinking twice, took stairs when she wanted to, even joined a beginner yoga class on a whim, just to feel how far her legs had come. But it wasn't just the mobility, it was the way she carried herself, not bracing for impact, not shrinking to accommodate others. She moved through the world like someone who belonged in it. On Sundays, she hosted quiet dinners, nothing fancy, soup, fresh bread, a bottle of wine. The table stayed open to the people who'd earned a seat there, Camille, Carly, Marcus, and Noreen, of course. There was no drama, just stories, clinking glasses, and shared silence that didn't demand to be filled. Camille, now more than just a nurse, had become something steady in Morgan's life. They hadn't rushed anything. no grand declarations, just moments coffee in the morning helping repot a stubborn fern, a soft touch to the back as they passed in the kitchen. Love didn't feel like effort anymore. It felt like exhale. Morgan's budgeting app had launched officially 3 weeks ago. Nothing viral, no overnight explosion. But the emails came in slowly, one by one. Women writing things like, "I didn't know what financial abuse was until I saw this. This app helped me leave my ex. Thank you. I feel seen." Each message felt like a tiny echo of her own journey, proof that even the quietest stories could ripple outward. And for the first time, Morgan wasn't just proud of surviving. She was proud of what she'd survived and what she'd chosen to become after. Not a martyr, not a victim, not a silent giver, but a whole woman. Solid, soft, steady, exactly who she was always meant to be. It had been weeks since the last message. Morgan hadn't blocked Brielle again. She hadn't needed to. The silence held its own kind of weight, final, but not bitter. The unopened letter from her father still sat in the desk drawer. Some days she forgot it was even there. Other days she'd glance toward it and wonder what it said. But the curiosity never turned into action. That silence, too, had become part of her peace. One afternoon, while clearing out old folders on her laptop, Morgan came across a file named Family Finances, Shared. She paused. It was a spreadsheet she hadn't opened in almost a year. She hovered the cursor, then double-clicked. Rows of numbers appeared. Transfers, notes, adjustments. Her handwriting, her tabs, her care, systematic and thoughtful. It was all still there. Meticulous records of how much she'd poured into keeping everyone else afloat. Rent support, car payments, course fees, Ivy's headshots, spa packages labeled wellness. All of it. It didn't make her angry anymore. It made her sad for the version of herself who thought love had to be earned through sacrifice. She closed the file. Right-clicked. Delete. A simple click. Then empty trash. Later that week, she received an invitation from the women's shelter she'd partnered with. They were hosting a small event to celebrate the success of the budgeting app and wanted Morgan to speak not just as the developer, but as a survivor. At first, she hesitated. She didn't like being at the center of attention. Her story wasn't dramatic, at least not in the way people expected. There had been no yelling, no restraining orders, no police reports, just quiet erosion. But then she thought about all the other women like her, the ones who still didn't have a name for what they were going through, and she said yes. The event was small, held in a community center downtown. Fluorescent lighting, mismatched chairs, a potluck table with foil-covered trays. Morgan stood in front of a group of 25 women. Some in hoodies, some in scrubs. All of them watching. She didn't read from a script. She just spoke. About quiet financial control, about being expected to give without question, about the way love can sometimes look like manipulation dressed up in gratitude. She ended simply, "You don't owe anyone your future just because they knew your past." The applause wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. It was enough, just like Morgan was. The following Sunday, Morgan walked to the farmer's market alone. No cane. No hesitation, just her, a canvas tote, and the rhythm of her own steps. She passed a vendor selling used books and stopped at a stand with fresh lavender. The sun was gentle, not too bright. The breeze carried the scent of cinnamon from a food truck nearby. Morgan didn't think about who might text her. She didn't wonder if Brielle would reach out again, or if her parents would try one last guilt trip through email or mail. She had stopped waiting for closure, because she already had it. Back home, she placed the lavender in a jar by the kitchen window. Then on instinct, she opened the drawer. The letter was still there, still unopened, still heavy with possibility, but not with power. This time, she didn't hesitate. She took the letter, walked it outside, and dropped it into the recycling bin without ceremony. No anger, no fanfare, just choice. Her story no longer belonged to anyone else's explanation. She stepped back into her apartment, took a deep breath, and smiled. Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't confrontation. It's choosing peace and walking away without needing to be understood. You don't need an apology to begin again. You don't owe anyone your healing. You are allowed to protect your peace even from the people who raised you. If you've ever felt trapped in silent sacrifice, giving, pleasing, staying small, know this. You can start over. You can take your power back, and you don't have to wait for permission. Your silence can be closure, your boundary can be the beginning, and your story, your real story, can finally be your own.